All righty. We'll go ahead and kind of get started as we get ready to get started. On the prayer list, we do want to remember Alex and all their family. Well, the Dean Milligan family, Alex's brother. The services this coming weekend. They're leaving on Tuesday to drive down there, as well as a lot of the other families. It's in Texas, so remember them through the funeral and on their drive and all that sort of thing. Jessie doing pretty well. We appreciate all the prayers to that. She was able to get started on her treatments again Tuesday. Marge Sneath is back in the hospital in Clinton, and so if you get a chance, give her a buzz. And then Pastor Deb is in the hospital, and they really don't know what's wrong with her. They're doing a lot of tests and things, and so but you can go on the Union Hospital website, send her a card or give her a call down there and that sort of thing. So let's just pray. Not just pray. Let's pray. All right. Gracious Lord, we just thank you for this time to come together. Those that are with us in this place, those that are with us through these devices, and we just thank you for your presence among us, no matter where we are or how we join. And we just thank you for this time to be able to be together, for the freedoms to gather as we do, to be able to have your Bible, study your word, gather as your children. And Lord, just help us not to take that for granted. And we pray for the soldiers and the rest that keep those freedoms for us. Lord, we also lift up these people we've spoken about tonight, as well as all the rest that are on our prayer list, Lord. And we also want to add Debbie Davies' nephew to that list as he battles cancer, and just, Lord, all the rest that are upon our hearts and spirits, and all these things we ask and pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All righty. So, Gail and I were talking. We think we're ready for 6. Is that what everybody's got? Yeah. I didn't mark it last week for some reason, so I do that every once in a while when we get talking about something different as we get done. So
I had written it down, and I had written it over here.
Yeah. I usually put it, because you can look in my Bible some places and there's N's and E's and R's and other letters for, this is where I stop for Newport, this is where I stop for Eugene, this is where I stop for Rockville. So, so if somebody ever gets my Bible, they won't know what the heck all those letters mean. But anyway, one thing I forgot to mention last week was actually the end of verse 5, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. And we talked about that and how the Jews tell time, because that's what God says, evening is first. So why do you but I didn't ask, why do you think evening is first?
Because everything was dark to start with.
It was dark to start with, yeah. That was how everything started. It started in darkness and went to light. So the days start with darkness and go to light. And so now, verse 6, and God said, let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. So, God is saying already that there are waters. We haven't really talked about waters yet. But we have the waters, and there's actually 2 different kinds of waters. There is the water of the ground and the water up above. And what kind of water do we have today? 2 kinds of water. Water up above and water that's already on the ground. And flip that thing off. I think it's boiled about as much water as it can boil back there. It'll stay warm. No, it's not.
No, it's still pumping.
All right. All right. If you hear anything going, that's the coffee pot in the background. That's not things rattling around between my ears. So, the expanse above the waters to separate, and the word expanse actually, in some translations, anybody say dome?
Mine says vault.
Yeah, the Hebrew word actually is the 2 words are different, and is why they use expanse and water. It actually says water and that water, or hard water. So they always considered it to be a hard expanse, and so because of that, some of the old translators said dome, because you're thinking of a flat. We're at the point when people believe there's a flat Earth, and if you've got a hard separation, it's almost like a dome or a plate or something like that to separate them out. And God made the expanse. He separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And so in the middle, what do we have? It's called the expanse? Sky. So there's the atmosphere. You have the water, air, and the water above it. And right now, those two waters aren't congealing to another. One of the views is that this is as the earth was forming and all those sort of things, and you had like a dense covering of clouds or something along that line, and as everything started to separate, those things rise, and you have the water on the bottom, you have the air that starts to separate in the middle, as you have all these clouds that are high up, and all of that. And it's one of those things that we see here, that you're going to see play out through all this. And God said, and what's the next part of that after everything happens?
It was good.
Yep, and it happened, and it was so. God said it was so. God said it was so. And so, the whole point of that is that God didn't do, God said. And when God says it, it is so. We talked a little bit last time about that a lot of this is in direct contrast to a lot of the pagan religions and things like that were around the world. And one of the first things here with this is what we call monotheism. This is God created. There are not a lot of gods. It wasn't something that they made. In every other creation story, whether it be the Romans, the Babylonians, Greeks, the Egyptians, or actually what they call West Indies, we call it India today, China, a lot of those, it was that there was something there and everything was made from it. That's the difference between created and made. We talked about that when we started up with it in the very beginning, that in beginning God created. There's a difference between created. Man makes. When you make something, you take something that's already there, and you can change it, reform it, do whatever that you need to do, melt it down, start it over. But the basic substance is there that you use. Or when you create, you're taking nothing and making it into something. And so that's what it says here, that God made the expanse and separated the water. So it was already there, and he's doing it. Now there's the first 3 days are days of forming, or some of them call them separating. God separated the darkness and the light. Then tonight, or in this day, day 2, he separates the sky and the water below, the water above. And then we're going to see that he goes on to separate. So, some of these things, when you look at them, they seem like this one especially. This, when you look at all the other stuff and some of the things that happened in those days, that this one seems kind of simple or short or whatever. And so here, though, this one is simple and short compared to, when God, on the 6th day, when everything was probably the biggest creation day. But, who knows what all was involved in those things. Now, one of the things that I didn't really mention last time is, there are different views of creation, even among Christians. And they've got terms for them. The first one is called the young earth theory, or young earth, whatever. It's people that believe in what they call the young earth. What the young earth is that the earth is only 6,000 years old. That, if you start and you count all the way back and all that, then you get to about 6,000 years ago or so that God began to create. And some of that comes from the word day, and it was And in the young earth, the view is that every day of these 6 days of creation was a 24-hour day. And so that's the way that they see that, and that's the way that all those things happen. There of course, are those that don't believe in the creation story at all, see it as fable and all those. There's the old earth group that says, yes, the earth could be 14 billion years old. And one of the things that is, to me, that is one of the most astounding things about Genesis 1 and 2 is, these things were written. Moses wrote the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible, or they call it the law, books of Moses. They call it the Pentateuch and different things, or we call it Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and Numbers. But even if you drag this all the way back to the time of Moses, which is about 1400 BC, 3,500 years ago, and Moses wrote these things down, and to kind of take it back a step from that, up till the time of Genesis, we have this first sections, and we're going to talk about it actually when it gets to the end of chapter 2, because it starts off with the Toledotes, which is a Hebrew word meaning the generations of. And that's some of these things are what they call anecdotal stories and all of those things. But as we look at this and as we count these things, one of those up till that time, starting with the Toledotes, the generations, it was what was called oral tradition. The Jewish men had the responsibility to teach their children word for word these stories and make sure that their children taught them word for word to their children. And the interesting thing about it, whether you look at this as a young earth or old earth, those stories stayed the same and were finally brought all together and written down by most. Now, it doesn't mean that the stories are only 3,400 years old. The stories are thousands and thousands of years old, basically from Adam to today. They were recorded about 3,400 years ago by Moses. But the thing that astounds me about all of this, 3,400 years ago, when you think about science, there was really no science. Nobody knew what science was. If you talked about science, or if you want to talk about some of the things that we consider science, they saw those as superstitions. And, spells, incantations. If you mix different chemicals together to get a reaction, you were some sort of magician and those sort of things. So, and sometimes that would get you elevated, sometimes it get your head cut off, just kind of depending on what they were looking at and where it was coming from. But the thing that is the most astounding about all of this is that now that we have science that's gone back and looked, especially this is where one of the places that the old earth people hang their hat on, is that the story of creation is told in Genesis almost matches exactly what science says, starting with the Big Bang Theory and on. And these are people they didn't know about those kind of things. They wrote down what God had told Adam, what Adam told Abel, and all the rest, all the way down to Moses and what Moses passes on to us. And so that's where the old earth people are, is the other world could be 13.8 billion years ago. Or is it shorter? Is it somewhere in the middle? Here's where the big question comes in and why it's not settled. The word day is yom, Y-O-M. And the word day does not necessarily mean a 24-hour day. It means day like our word means day. Does our word day mean 24 hours? No. It depends on how we use it. It can mean 24 hours, 7 days in a week. But how many times you heard somebody say, well, back in the day, were they talking about a day? Back in my day. Back in that day. Or in the day of the kings and queens, well, that's about 1,000 years, and all those sort of things. So the word day in the Hebrew, yom, can mean an unspecified period of time. It talks about it being in blocks. And so the old earth people say, well, it matches, and it matches almost exactly with science if you're looking at it that it's not a 24-hour day. Now, what the young earth people say, those who believe that it was 6 calendar days, is that those things all are in the right order. It's just, all of it's still in the right order. Big Bang Theory, old earth, young earth. The question between all of them is, what is a day? What is a day to God? Now, the other thing that kind of comes into play on all of it too is when do we start counting time on what day of creation? 4. But we're already counting time. So does it take, because it's, we're going to get to that, the sun and the moon and the stars, and we're put there for the seasons, the days, and all that. So the old earth people say, well, how can you say it's 6 calendar days when we didn't have calendar days till halfway through? Pretty well the halfway point, day 4. If you look at what day's in the middle of the 7, and I think it's 4, it might be 5, but not the middle day, the day that those things were created. But so there is that thing. And the stories and these kind of things, when you look at it, and from the old earth people and saying, all right, so, what's the first thing God created? Everything was dark. What's the first thing he created? Light. What's the first thing that happens in an explosion? Light. And so, boom, there it goes. This is where the old earth people are. And so you have the light that goes out and begins to radiate, and things are spreading out, and things are starting to settle down. And then you have this thing that starts to come together. That's this thing that we eventually call Earth, and that as the atmosphere and all the waters and all these things begin to gel, without getting into, there's even some scientific things about some of the rocks that are porous that they find in the earth that can contain water. They come, they cool, they give off that water. That's where the water comes from, and all those kind of things. God said, let there be water, and there was, as far as I'm concerned. But, you can dig into it too much. But also, then the next thing that happens, according to scientists that study those things. Oh, let me throw this out there too. This whole idea that science and the Bible don't agree, or that most scientists are not theologians. Oxford University did a study a few years ago and found out that the majority of scientists are people of faith. And so this whole idea that, if you're a scientist, you're not a and that person of faith could be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, anything, but that believe in these things and see science as backing up what God did, not science in adverse to what God did. Now, from a faith standpoint, what we say is that science can tell us what, science never tells us how. And that is, I think the more science comes out, the more prevalent that becomes, because just like our brains, we know what our brain does. Nobody can tell us how it does it. They may tell you about the neurons and all that, but how do the thoughts bounce around, and where do they come from, and all that? And so, even far as from a faith standpoint, when we look at Genesis, it's good to know all these other things and how they match with all of it. But the big point is it's not that humans were created, it's who created us and what are we supposed to do with what God created. That's the whole point of the Genesis story. So getting back to this, these old earth people, and the young earth, we'll just kind of leave that as it is, because they're every day. It's one 24-hour day. Can God do it in a 24-hour day? I'm sure he can. But the old earth thing, when you're looking at this whole idea of the Big Bang, which one of the things I always ask the Big Bang people, the evolutionists, is, they always say, well, where'd God come from? Well, where'd the stuff come from that exploded? What started? The whole thing about something had to be made, and so something came out of nothing. From nothing came something, and from then nothing came, life came from that. And there he is. And so, then where did all those things come from? So anyway, it takes more faith. There's an old statement, it takes more faith to believe in evolution than it does to believe in creation. So anyway, one of the things that they say is as these things, and this is where it kind of matches with science, even on day 2, is as the earth formed and as these things, that the next thing that happened was the atmosphere began to separate. That you had this dense covering all around the outside of the world, like a big blanket or almost a ball within a ball. And between those was first the sky. And you had all these things up and around and covering like a, just like a dense set of clouds all the way around the earth. The other thing that sounds like that we talked about in our thing of Revelation, is something like nuclear winter, which when there are so many explosions, if that, we talked about the fire and brimstone coming down and the sun being blocked out and all those things, that's one, whether it be volcanoes, nuclear bombs, all that, there's so much dust and things in the air that the sun will be clouded out. You won't be able to see it. So, there could be so much dust, so much vapor, so many things in the air that as this separation is taking place, you got light. It doesn't say you have the sun yet, but there could be light. Now, the other thing you always need to remember is that when we think about it, especially when we look at it from a scientific standpoint, we want to sit back and look at it from the top down. And what you always got to remember that Genesis is written from what they call an earth view, from the earth up, looking at it from the earth going, because it's written for people. It's written for us to understand, and we're not out in outer space. These people that translated this story all the way, or transmitted this story all the way down, they weren't up in outer space looking down. They didn't have satellites looking at how the climates move and all that. It's word of mouth. And they're sitting here and they're looking up at all these things. So now what we have, either way, any way you want to look at it, old earth, young earth, evolution, whatever, we have this ball with water all around it. We have sky, and then we have another cloud around that at the end of day 2. And and then there was evening and morning the second day. So then verse 9, and God said, let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. Those two things always go together. And God said, and it was so. So God called the dry ground land Adamah, and he gathered the waters, and he called seas, and God saw that it was good. One of the evolution things that comes up is says in the beginning, or not in the beginning, as the world began to be formed, when it was at that stage, it was basically a ball, a smooth ball. Now, not smooth like a billiard ball, but basically a smooth ball. There weren't mountains. There weren't the deep crevices in the oceans. And actually, and this is one of those things that kids learn about that we talk about today with the problems in California, the Pacific Rim, a lot of places like that, called tectonic plates. That at one time, if you've ever seen, you see those big flat maps of the United States where they kind of cut the globe off, it kind of looks kind of funky. But if you look at all those things, you can almost see where they all fit together. And so one of the views, actually old Earth, young Earth, one of the things that they kind of agree about was that all that land was the same in the beginning. It was just land. It wasn't God. It doesn't say God created continents. He created the land. Now, or he actually didn't create the land, but the things began to dry out and the land was there. Now, one of the interesting things about it is one of the things that science says is that there was a period of time when the whole earth was covered by water. And if you took all the water, if you leveled the ground out all the way around the earth, you brought the Himalayan mountains down to ground level, and you brought the sea up to ground level, how much water do you think would circle the globe? How deep would you think it would be on the average around? 1.5 miles of water. And so that's kind of the view here when it says that, because it said he separates the the dome above the sky and water, and then ground appears. That those things begin to dry out. That came up. That the original continent was made, and there's some views about those tectonic plates that we'll get into a little bit later in the Noah story, about what some of the views are about how the continents came to be and all those. So, God says, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place. And, people will tell you that if you can connect all the oceans and the seas, Martha. And the land and all. I got them right. I'll try to get them right. If you look at a map, all the waters all the way around the globe are connected. And so that, you could say that's one place. But if you got one group of land, everything else around it would be all water. And the dry ground appeared. And whether God raised it up, whatever he did with it, that's how it appeared. Or that at that point in time, the ground was already starting to move as things began to form and God did his thing. And the oceans and all of that. So, because he does call them seas. And so we have now dry ground versus water. We have the sky, and we have this blanket all around everything. So then verse 11, that God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, trees on the land that bear fruit with seeds in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seeds in it according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So, that's kind of the way that even that some of those scientists say that, once the earth began to be formed, once the dirt was exposed, things began to grow. Now here, one of the big differences is that, when you look at it from an evolution standpoint, you had to have one cell that starts off, and then that one cell develops and splits and whatever, or there may have been others, but it kind of starts off with one. And that one cell, over millions or billions of years, began to change into its grass. One becomes grass, one becomes trees, one becomes roses, one becomes all these things as as evolution develops into those things. Now, that's where we differ, because what the Bible tells us is that God said, let the land produce vegetation, and then they drive it out. And there's a word in there that, whether you see it or not, it's the same word that is used in the Noah story with the animals that go on the boat. That is a kind of a misconception with some people. And what is it that it says here about how did God, when God put the plants on the earth, how did he do it?
It says in their kinds.
According to their kinds. What do you think kinds are?
Match. Male and female.
No? All right, what do we call that? It was there.
You're not going to tell us.
No, it's, not species, the next class up from species. But anyway, like all trees are of a certain kind. God made trees. It doesn't say that in the beginning he made a maple tree and a poplar tree, and he made trees according to their kind, to their species. And just like with some of the, when you're in school, you learn that there are different kinds of animals. There are mammals, and there are, we have all these different species within these groups that we classify them in, and those groups in the Bible are called kinds. And the same thing, we get to Noah, and it says two of every kind. It doesn't mean, that two of every type of cats. It means there was felines, there was canines, and all those, and everything came from those. So that's what it seems to indicate here. And vegetation. And what did they have in them?
Seeds.
Seeds. So, where do plants come from? Seeds. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? Here, it's the chicken.
Oh.
No, the
Chicken doesn't have to have the egg now.
yeah. It's the what or what came first, the plant or the seed? The plant.
Plant.
God made the plants produce seeds. So what does that tell you too? There's an order. There's an order to the kinds. There's an order to how things go. Seed gets planted, the seed grows, the seed becomes a plant, and then what happens? It has more seeds. They get planted and they grow. And so when God created, he did not just create for that time. He created for everything until the earth melts away, as we read about 3 weeks ago. So there is an order, and remember that kind of reverts back to where we started. We started with chaos, null and void, dark, all that, and then every time God puts order. It wasn't that the land and the seas are fighting, or that all those things. This is it. This is the way it's set up. This is the way it's going to work. And he puts it into effect, puts it into an order that whether you're a young earther or you're an old earther, that order is still going today. The plants produce seeds go in the ground, and they grow. Now, it's one of those things too. Science can tell us that you put the seed in the ground. If the ground's warm enough and it gets some moisture, it's going to grow. Why does it grow? That's how it grows. Why does it grow? Why does it do that? What's in there? How did it form? All those things. Is it by chance? That's what evolutionists say. Or was it that God said, that maple tree, if I'm going to have more of them, it needs to have these whirly-bird things that come flying, floating down, and all that kind of stuff. That was all part of it, and that's the way that it goes, and it's part of that order. And it also matches with what they say about, like we talked about a minute ago, canines. That everybody talks about. Well, there were the wolves, and the dogs come from wolves, and all the different dog species, and all of that. And the answer is, yeah, that, and so in that sense of that order, you could say that there is evolution within creation, but not everything started. God created, God made, God created, God said it was so, and then those things came on. And that's the difference even between created and made. Some of the breeds nowadays, they mix them together to get another breed. But one of the things that's interesting about it, whether you've ever heard or read or anything, when they breed dogs, cats, horses, rose bushes, all that stuff is what happens is what you're doing when you're bringing things together. We talk about matching the RNA and the DNA and all that kind of thing and trying to make new, but what occurs is that they always separate. You always lose some. We are never able to put those things back in. They've never figured that out. And here's one of the examples. It doesn't matter how many little dogs you breed or what you try to do to them, are you ever going to get a big dog out of it? But so they breed these dogs all the way down to get the little ones. You can't breed them back up. You can keep mixing them with the big ones, and you may get some medium-sized dogs. You're not going to get that full-size dog again. And so because we've taken those things out, God put them there. God created them and set them up in their kind. Those kinds can change. They can change within the kind. There's all kinds of different cows. There's all kinds of different fish. There's all kinds of different things out there according to their kinds, different trees, plants. But only God can make the kind. When it comes to the species and all that, only God can do that. And then those kinds develop. So it doesn't say, even here, it says the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds. And trees bearing fruit with seed in it. So you have both kinds, right? Both types. Let me change that because the kind is a special word here. Both types. You have the type that just produces seeds, maple trees. You have the ones that produce fruit with seed in it, fruit trees, apples, peaches, pears, all those kind of things. So it does mention those two and all that, and everything according to its kind. And God saw what?
It's good.
It was good. It was good. Everything was created good. And so now, one of the things you're going to notice here too, between this section and the next section, is that God's going to add something a little bit different. Well, actually, when we get down to day 6, but I'll refer back to it rather than having you to try to remember it. So, but the big question though with this section is, what do we not have yet?
Man.
What do you usually think you got to have to grow plants?
Sunlight.
Sunlight. So what do we not have?
Sun.
A sun. But is that so? People say, well, how can you have plants? How can you have trees and plants and all kinds of green stuff with no sun? Because it takes the sun to be green, right? You got to have photosynthesis and all of those sort of things. So how do you have plants with no sun?
God said it was there.
Huh? God said it? Yeah. Yeah. How do you debate that one? I just want to close my Bible and go home. Today, what does... All right, let me rephrase this, or do it this way. Back when I patrolled as a volunteer cop for a couple of years, many years ago, and along not too far away. That's when you could get in trouble for growing marijuana. So where do people usually grow it?
In the basement.
In the basement. But what did they put down there in the basement? Did the sunlight get down there? What did they have to have? Light. So, do we have light? Yep. All right. But what do we have in the sky? The expanse of all these clouds. And we have this blanket over everything. The sun's not shining through. Doesn't necessarily mean that the sun's not there. There's a little play on words when we get to the sun. But remember I told you, they're looking at it from an earth thing. If you're at the ground looking up, can you tell what's beyond the blanket? All right, and you're all the same way. How many totally overcast, dark days do you have? Is it still light outside? It's pouring down rain. Is it still light outside? There's no way you can see the sun, is there? But there's light, and that light is shining through. So we already got light. We got light on day 1. So we have light for the plants. The light is shining through. It doesn't say how strong it was or how weak it was, but light is shining through. So plants can grow. So there is an answer if somebody says, well, you got things out of order. You got the plants before you got the sun. No, we got the plants after we got the light. Photosynthesis can still occur. And the other thing too, looking at it from my standpoint, if and looking at it at the way that the old Earth people look at it, one of the things that they thought is those things separated and all that was what condition was the air in, that they thought there was a lot of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide from the way that, you get this explosion, all these things form and all these gases and the stuff's forming. What takes those things away? Green plants. So, it's one of those things that some people could say, well, so God puts the green plants there, first off, early on, to filter for 2 reasons. One of them could be to filter the air, get it prepared for those things that are about to come. Not just people, but others too. So, 3rd day. Now, and God said, this verse 14, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser night to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, 3 days. So, you have this expanse, you have this cloud. One of the things that in the Hebrew that it says is that these things are not called lights, they're called light bearers. And there's kind of a difference. We have light that God created on the first day. So these are light bearers or light bringers, and there's a little bit of a difference. And so what most believe is that at this point in time, with the plants and with all those things on, the sky's clearing up. And now God puts the sun, whether it was there. Some people will argue that, or debate, not get in like what we call an argument, we'll discuss, was the sun already there, but we couldn't see it because this is an earth up look. And if you've got this blanket over everything, you've got the light, but could you just not see it? And now God's clearing up the sky, and he's putting these things there. And now you've got the sun and the moon, the greater light, the lesser light. Now, do you notice what, are they called by name or in a term that we use them? No, they're just called lights. And and what are they to do? There's 3 purposes for them. 17, 18, 19.
They govern.
Govern the day and the night. What else? Separate the light and the darkness. That's kind of the day and the night. Mark the seasons.
Days and years.
Yep, and days and years. So there's a reason for those things, that it's not called the sun and the moon. That we are told that God, excuse me, that God said, let there be lights in the sky. And how did the stars get there? He put them there. And it says, he also made the stars, in verse 17, God set them in the expanse of the sky. Now, we talked about that in beginning Genesis, that one of the things about it was that whole monotheism thing. Only God. In Sunday school, we're going through the 10 Commandments. It starts off with there's only God, only one, and all that kind of stuff. What was the number one thing that people worshipped in the Ancient of Days, from basically the time of Adam till the Jews, till Abraham and all that come along? The sun and the moon and the stars and those things. And do they have powers? People think that they have powers. Do the stars have powers? All right. Say no. How many of you check your astrological sign? Do Leos match with this? Does this match with that? Some people get up every day. Check that in the newspaper. What do the stars say? It's going to happen to me today. What star were you born under? Look into the fortune of the stars and all of those kind of things. So what we're being told here is, yeah, right, they got power. God put them there. How can they have power? God put them there. It's just a light. It doesn't even. I think we get to. It's about 8 or 9, or it might be chapter 15 before it's ever called the sun. And that's part of it. Why are you worshiping something that God created? God, God made these things. God set it there. God, the one that he set all the stars in place. And one of the things, as we think about the sun and the moon and the stars, this is probably the number one day that speaks to us of order. Right? How many hours in a day? 24. Pretty well every day. There's a second or two off, and that's why we get into leap year and all that kind of thing. But But is it there every day? Does anybody ever worry about the sun not coming up? What about the stars? I think I mentioned this when we were studying Revelation. The stars are something that basically from the time that people started traveling, they have traveled more with the stars than they have with the sun and the daytime, because the stars are in the same place every night. Now they will rotate with the rotation of, but they understand that. One thing's in Boy Scouts. Well, they always tell you, the first thing they tell you in Boy Scouts, if you're out, you always look for one thing: North Star. There you go. If you find the North Star, you can find yourself anywhere. That's the way that navigators on ships for thousands of years did it. And the United States government, in their infinite wisdom, about 10 or 15 years ago, decided they didn't need to teach. This is the Naval Academy. They didn't need to teach Navy officers anymore how to navigate by the stars, because they have GPS, you got satellites, and then all this stuff. Until about 3 or 4 years ago, when there was all that concern about the what? Yeah, I can't remember what it was called. The blast that takes out all the electronics, all the satellites, and all that kind of stuff. And then they thought, oh man, we're going to have ships all over the world stuck because they won't know north from south, east from west. And so they started again, because that's one thing that is so constant, that governments can count on their ships, their airplanes, and all the rest to be able to navigate from now all the way. It doesn't matter if you're a young earther, you're an old earther, all those things are the same. And that speaks of that order of God. God is not a God of chaos. God is a God of order. Genesis is about God taking chaos and creating order out of it. And not just creating it for a little bit, but setting it up for good. And so, so you don't worship these things, that God put them there. And he didn't even name them. They don't even, God put them there. They're so trivial, they don't even deserve a name. They're just a lesser light and a greater light. One of the things, too, about order, and I mentioned this 3 weeks ago, or a month or so, one Sunday morning. One of the unique things about this and about the earth, and as far as they know, the scientists have been able to discover, the earth is the only place in anywhere that they know. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon. The moon is 400 times closer than the sun. And so they look the same size. And the only difference in them is one is brighter than the other. It doesn't say the bigger one. It's basically written the one that shines, the greater, the one with, you could say the one with the greater light, not the greater light, but the one with the greater light governs the day. Yeah, that makes sense. And the one with the lesser light governs the night. And so, and God put them there for order, for a reason. And the other part of it, too, is that God put them there. Now, you got to remember, and I don't know if I mentioned this last week or not, all of the creation story is about what God did for people. Everything in creation is about setting up the world for people. So that's what he's done for us here. At this point in time, do you really need seasons or days or years or anything? No. We start counting things by that time. So even here it's saying, these things aren't out there that you have to worship. You're not here for them as the sun worshipers thought. And we're not talking about the sun worshipers like we have nowadays, that goes, got to take everything off and get the dark tan and all that sort of thing. People actually bow down to the sun and all of those sort of things that, they don't have any power over you. They don't determine who you are, because they're nothing. God put them there. It's kind of like, some of the dads used to say before, I put you there. I can take you out. I can make another one look just like you. You know, that's kind of where God is on this stuff. And that's the point of all this is what are you worshiping that for? Don't worship that. Worship the Creator, not anything of the creation. And it's kind of the same thing with the trees and all that. You know, that God put them there. He created each kind and all, because there were people in the world that worship trees. They call them druids. You know the old knock on. You know that's old idol worship. The gods were in the trees for the druids. You knocked on wood to get the god's attention and asked for, for good favor. That's where that whole thing comes from the old Irish and the Scots and all of that. So that's people were worshiping the nature when nature's put here for them, and we're going to say that they're higher than nature. So, and God said, verse 20, let the waters teem with living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. So, God created the great creatures of the sea and every living and moving thing into which the water teems according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water in the seas. Let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. Now there's a couple of different things here. You know, when God said, let there be vegetation, and there was. He said, let the earth produce vegetation. So it started from the ground and comes up. And where does everything come from? It grows up from the ground and all of that, even the vegetation in the ocean and that sort of thing. God said, let there be lights, and there was. But there's that unique word that's only used a handful of times here that says, verse 21, so God created the great creatures. God said, let the water teem with living creatures, let birds fly above the earth and across the expanse of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea. Now, that great creature, that's actually, I wish I could remember that. It's sometimes just translated Leviathan. And actually in the Hebrew it says the great sea monsters. Now, why do you think it would say that God created the great sea monsters? Because everybody thought that the great sea monsters were bad and were evil. And, there's something that you had to worship. The Babylonians feared, it was Tiamat or whatever anyway. And, the Bible speaks of the Leviathan that the Jewish people just absolutely feared. They were afraid of it. And that was almost like the Middle Ages things, of the creatures that would swallow the ships and all that kind of stuff. But the point of it is, God's saying, or what we're being told here is that, those great big things in the ocean you're so afraid of, they're nothing special. God made them too. God made them. Don't worship them. Don't think that they're something special, because they're just a creature. And a creature is something that has been created. There you go, Janie. And so God created them. The great creatures of the sea. Don't worship them. God made them. And every living and moving thing with which the water teems, and according to its species or its kind. And then every winged bird. Actually, it doesn't. The Hebrew doesn't say winged bird. It says winged creatures, because it includes anything that has wings. Grasshoppers, mosquitoes, anything, flies. Man, we had a fly in the house a while ago. Sounded like a 747 climber buzzing around in there. I don't know. I never could catch him or find him, but you could hear him in the other room. So, but it's everything that has wings according to its kind, and it was good. Now, the other thing too to think about here a little bit. What do the evolutionists? What is the order of creatures that supposedly appeared on the earth, or that evolved upon the earth? Fish, then amphibians and birds. And, they can't connect them. That's what they say. And if you ever want to see where those connections are for all the different things, from the primordial sloop to the first cell to all these different things, do you ever remember an old movie with a hippo that danced, a pink hippo with a tutu? Remember the name of that movie? Fantasia. Remember the beginning of Fantasia? Walt Disney was a big evolutionist. The whole first part of that movie is about evolution. Because what better way can you indoctrinate the kids than to bring them in to watch a hippo dancing in a tutu and indoctrinate them on evolution. But one of the things that if you ever watch that, or if you get it out, every once in a while on that evolution part, the screen will go black and then it comes back on. Then it'll go black and it comes back on. You know what those are called? In science, they're called the Great Leap. They say it went from here to here, but that's a great leap, and they don't have anything that connects it there. And so anyway, everywhere that they can't make that connection, the screen goes black, it comes back on, because your mind is continuing on, and that sort of things. But that's not the way it happened. But they said, sea, and then birds. And guess what the Bible says? Sea, and then birds. Now, the other two things too, did God make a lot of them? No. Because what did he tell them? Multiply and fill the earth. And this is one that's different from what it was with the trees and the plants, because he does what to them? Before he tells them to be fruitful, increase in number, and fill. Blesses them. So this is the first blessing in the Bible. And so, that God said, fill according to their kinds. They're going to develop out. Fill the ocean, which means the ocean wasn't full. Fill the sky, which means the sky wasn't full. And all of that. And so they increased upon the earth. And the birds increased, and the the bugs, he made the bugs early. You could have skipped that part, but God in his infinite wisdom, the snakes. Yeah, that's every living and moving thing. Well, when the water, depends on if you think they're in the water or on the land. So that's why there's an old thing, I don't know if you ever heard it, because it said if Noah had been a man so wise, he would have swatted those pesky flies. So, they got everything's got a purpose, like I talked about even with the skunks and the buzzards. So I got 659. One of the things I meant to mention too is that starting with 20, we are now in the days of filling. Or actually, in verse 14, God filled the sky. He filled the outer space. Now, in this part we just said, what did he fill? The oceans and the He filled the land with the trees. First, it's a separation. Dark, light, the waters between and making this and separating the sky. Then he separates the ground from the waters, and then he starts to fill all those things: vegetation, outer space, the sea, the air, and of course next time we'll get into the land. So next time we'll start up with verse 24. So see y'all next time. If you ever got any questions, just send them in, or you can be like this Gail over here. She had to come in because she said I couldn't hear her when she was hollering at the computer. Now that's kind of with several of us talking about that this morning. It's just nice because it is hard to watch when you do put things on there. So to see, and it's a whole lot nicer when you can be here and ask questions. But if you do have them and you're out there, type them on, and I'll try to catch them. So see y'all next time around. Glad you were with us.
Well, we're so glad you guys